Now in this video, what I wanted to do is kind of explain a program entry point, and hopefully when we're done you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. In a C application, for example, when we go in and write an application, let's just say that we've got our little program here and we're going to run this program. So when we run the program, we basically tell the operating system to execute this particular application. So we tell it to execute, and we'll just call this program 1. So we'll tell it to execute program 1. Well, if you think about it, inside of this program, we've got a lot of different functions. We've got variables all inside of the application. We've got all types of things that we have written inside of this program, and maybe they're even made up of multiple files if it's a really big program. So the operating system needs to know where to start executing that application. And in order to do that, the program either needs to be laid out in a top-down fashion, where you basically start at the top of the application and start running it until you get to the bottom. If you think about that type of an application, though, it would be extremely difficult to write an entire application if you had to start at the top of the file and write to the bottom. Because there's all types of things that go on through the course of writing an application, and if I've got to always remember to put them top to bottom in that particular file or in that particular program, it could get really difficult. So a lot of the languages have the concept of a main function that is the entry point for that application. So somewhere in that application, you're going to have a function that is declared as main, and it is going to be what gets executed first when that application starts to run. Now, what's in this function is usually going to be the first part of your code. This is going to be, okay, when we first start running, I want you to call this function and call function 1 and pass it hello. Whatever it happens to be, we can go in and tell it specifically where we want to start. Now, once that function gets called, everything starts to build on from there. So as we start to call the application, this function calls this function, and that function turns around and calls this function, which turns around and calls this function, and then that function calls this function, and then it starts to return back up the loop until it comes back to where it came from. So as you call a function, it's going to execute until it finishes, and then it returns back and returns control back to the function that called it. So the main function's purpose is to give me an entry point. Now, just having said that, Java, C, Objective-C, all of these languages, Python to some degree, all of these languages have the concept of main. But if we start talking about scripting languages like PHP, these languages actually are top to bottom processes. And by that, what I mean is, if I have a page and we've added a bunch of lines of code to the page, what PHP actually does is it will open this file, it will read the entire file, and then once it has read the file, then it will go back and start executing from the top down in this particular file. And it's okay to have functions where, let's say this is a function here, and I can have code, I could even have code here that's going to call that function, because PHP has read the entire file in and can then call anything inside of it that it wants. But the point is that it starts reading at the very top of the file and continues to read until it gets to the bottom, unless you tell it to exit or do something else. So there's a big difference between a scripting language that is literally like a piece of paper telling the computer what to do as it reads down this piece of paper, versus a programming language where you have actually compiled your file into an actual object, and then the operating system itself has to know how to read that and how to work with it. So This whole concept of having a main function is really just the computer's way of knowing that, hey, when I run this application or when I open up this scripting file, this is the process that I need to go through in order to execute the code and do whatever it is that's in that code for that I'm supposed to do.